Hello, and welcome to the Jim Ruff Show. Today I have a special guest who actually lives in Newport Beach area of California, and it's Bart Blinder, who's a psychiatrist, author, professor, and lots more actually. Welcome, Bart.
Thank you, Jim.
Yeah. So we're going to talk today about trauma, and I want to tell a little story first to kind of kick us off.
Sure.
Okay, and then find out how this works from your standpoint. And the story is that I was facilitating a group of homeless people in Oregon, and during one of the breaks, some woman said to me, "Don't you know that every person out there is suffering from post-traumatic stress disorder? Can't you see it?" And you know, I couldn't see it and I didn't know it, and I was involved in this facilitation for years. And she was saying, "Well, can't you see how their eyes glaze over sometimes, or they get numb, or they get hyperactive or whatever?" And I thought, no, I didn't see any of that. So here I was, a professional facilitator, and I was thinking, gosh, here's a whole field. I didn't know anything. And the process went terrifically well. And I started studying about post-traumatic stress disorder and so forth. And I began to realize that the kind of facilitation I do, dynamic facilitation, is making a big difference with these people. People that are suffering from this are really moving forward. And in this case, what happened was that these homeless people were coming up with a statement together, and their statement was, "Hey, we don't, Middle America, you designed a welfare system for yourselves. You didn't design it for us. And for us, it blocks us. And we can't get out of this mess with your system holding us back." So anyway, it's how it got started into this post-traumatic stress disorder and so forth. And so my thesis is, dynamic facilitation has some attributes that could be really helpful in dealing with post-traumatic stress and healing trauma people. And I wanted to explore that with you in the half hour or so that we have.
Well, I think your insight was a very good one. A lot of the population, the homeless, often have a great deal of hopelessness, helplessness. They're embedded in a very difficult situation. I'm sure in a narrative sense, in their autobiographies, they've experienced a great deal of humiliation. They've experienced life and death situations and so on. So I would see that population as having experienced perhaps several dramatic instances in which maybe they came near death from exposure, from interaction with authorities, from criminal criminal attacks against them, and then in some ways cumulative trauma over time, just from many experiences that they've had to encounter of hopelessness and helplessness. So I'm not surprised to hear that many of them have symptoms of PTSD, which would be extreme sensitivity to the environment, negative reminiscences, agitation, anxiety, insomnia, and so on, depression. I'm sure many of them suffer in that way. They're constantly coping, constantly surviving, and so on. So it's not surprising that they were able to give you that feedback. Dynamic facilitation, the work that you do, I think can be helpful in many different ways. I think it can give a chance for self-expression and for elaboration, that is for the homeless individuals to talk about their experiences, I think, as a starter, to maybe gain some feedback, some perspective. I think ventilation is helpful. That may be helpful. And then also, I think, as they can gain a handle on it from sort of a group awareness of what might be a different perspective or a supportive perspective for them. Let me ask you how you would see what your experience was in terms of how it helped.
Well, I think the most important thing is that the way I've come to think about it, I guess, is that something has happened in their life that has overwhelmed them and put them in that has challenged. It's been done violence to the story that they tell themselves about who they are and to their sense of security in the world. And so they've been rocked in some way, and there's a story now that's been, they don't have a story in a way, and so they adopt some other kind of story, I guess.
Alienated from society.
And alienated, yeah. So then, in the dynamic facilitation process, what we do is we take a symptom. Like, for instance, I just work with some kids at the
Sure.
local school, and these were the kids that had been designated as kind of troublemakers from middle school, that they had been in trouble in some way. And so I was working with them before they start high school. And the kids start by identifying what the presenting problem. In this case, it was relationships. It's their issue. They chose relationships.
Some traumatic relationship, a disappointment?
No, just the fact that
just
they
in
are
general?
unable to they seem to get in trouble, they seem to
Oh,
act
as a
out,
symptom,
they seem to
right.
Not be in relationships like other kids. So they chose that as the issue, and as we work in dynamic facilitation, the nature of the problem changes. People they deal with their expression of frustration and what they think ought to be done or what they could do, and the problem shifts in what they're doing. And they unanimously come to a shared perspective. And in this case, the breakthrough was, where they all looked at one another and nodded, was that our problems come from our families. We don't live in families that are working. We don't have, we have these horrible background
Yes,
in our families.
What we would say from a psychotherapeutic standpoint or analytics is that they changed their attribution. They changed to whom they attributed the problem.
Very
and
good,
that
yeah.
change of perspective was critical.
Critical. And it's a joint change of perspective. In other words, they all look at one another and they're all kind of building a story together. It's not just me, but it's a shared story that I'm now feeling support. And in that, it isn't just about the story, it's about now we're trying to find a solution to the relationships problem.
Right, and I think that's very critical. One might say, well, they changed to whom they attributed the situation, therefore they were just blaming but it wasn't blame, it was really getting a more accurate and valid perspective
Yes.
from where they were
Yes.
before. And now, as you're saying now they're expanding it.
Right. And so now they have this sense of not only like, here's my situation, but my situation in this context of seeing with other students and how we all have suffered this way. Now, what could we do about our situation? And so, we were only working, we had like about 4 hours, I think, to work with the students in this way. And using dynamic facilitation, you get these insights where everybody gets them together. And they're heartfelt, so that an idea pops up. And it came up by somebody saying what their parent had done with them recently. And basically it was something around, the parent broke into tears and said, look, I don't know what's wrong. I don't want this relationship. I want a better relationship, and I apologize. So the kids talked about that for a while. And, then it came out, well, that's something we could do. But it wasn't, that was not embraced, I gotta be fair. I mean, it was just an idea that was floated, and it sort of came into all the
Sort
kids.
of a model they could think
relate
about.
to, yeah. I mean, I could go to my parents and say, look, I apologize, I don't want this relationship, can we sit down and talk about a different relationship? Now, this is not what kids this age do. But they saw that idea and they realized it would, quote, turn the world upside down if they did.
Yeah, and I think it was important that they saw an alternative within a group process, that they were emotionally involved in the group, and here they saw an alternate model. They could have read it in a book,
Yes.
or someone
Right.
heard it on a tape or whatever,
yes.
but it's not the same.
Not the
as
same,
in a
no.
group. The other process, universalization as a group process, very, very important. In other words, using the group thought and the group idea to help to modify your own ideas, and that can be very, very positive.
Well, that's what I think is it, and so this was like a 4-hour session with a bunch of kids, and I'm thinking, okay, the other processes that I'm aware of are dealing with post-traumatic stress, take decades, and of individual therapy plus medicines and drugs and so forth, because there is a rewiring that happens.
Yes, and the terms dynamic facilitation suggest change, dynamic, change and action, change and participation, and those are essential in all psychotherapies. They're essential in psychoanalysis, where we have hundreds of hours of treatment with transference feelings. They're essential in Gestalt therapy, they're essential in family therapy and in different group therapies. And I think that dynamic facilitation emphasizes those factors that lead to change. You might say that the kids are coming out of their trauma prison. They're coming out of their traumatic thought prison. And this is a pathway or a process that helps them to that is much different than they can gain possibly by individual counseling or reading something in a book. Medication can help symptoms such as anxiety and mood. We're even experimenting now with, believe it or not, medication that might be able to modify the traumatic memories, which are put in the brain in a special spot where they stick for decades, and perhaps that'll help. But I think this therapeutic approach, and in actuality, the dynamic facilitation is a process. It wasn't indicated as therapy, I would imagine.
No, it wasn't. But I can't help but notice these therapeutic effects that
No question.
are a little bit mind-boggling. Because in my mind, the therapeutic situation, individually working with somebody, someone was writing on our listserv recently, what do you do about transference in dynamic facilitation?
Sure.
We don't get it because we're not in the play with the client. I mean, the facilitator's really not in there. It's the clients talking among themselves, or the client working with themselves.
What happens in formal psychoanalysis, and I am an adult and child psychoanalyst, is another one of my hats, so to speak. But what happens there is that hours and hours of work, individual work, produce an intensification of the relationship, and then we feel that some of the feelings that emerge are important for
Yes.
change. But I think that what happens in the group, participation, arousal, changing perspectives, and identification, universal identification, with a changing group process, pulls the person gradually out of their thought prison, so to speak, in other words, and it can be very helpful. Unfortunately, group therapy is less used. We use group therapy often in institutions and so on, but as far as group psychotherapy in the public, it is very much diminished in use today,
Yes,
unfortunately.
Well, yeah, to me, this isn't group therapy. It is really dynamic facilitation in the sense that what we do is we help people identify a current issue in their life that they want to work on. So, it may seem like something they can't do anything about. It could be anxiety about
Sure.
paying their health care bills, or anxiety about the war in Iraq, or whatever has energy for them. we start there. And then it's heroic in a way, as we talked about,
Yes.
that for them to turn and face that issue, because they don't think they can do anything about it.
They feel helpless.
They feel helpless.
Absolutely.
And so, but we're, the facilitators, just helping them confront the issue, not talking to me necessarily, but they're confronting the issue, and they're staying in a creative space, and shifts happen.
And
insights happen.
Absolutely. And it converts the passivity, that is helplessness, to activity.
To activity,
which
right.
is very, very critical. What the thought that occurred to me is that just as dynamic facilitation presents itself to problems in society, say for the councils, the interest councils and the councils to take up a problem in society, in this case, in this situation, it's focusing on problems in relationship or problems
Exactly.
in living.
Exactly. We just start with the people's energy, and the wisdom council process you were talking about is like taking people and bringing them together and having them work on the issue they feel is important.
In which case, it might be a societal.
A societal, yeah. But yeah, this is where somebody, and it can be done with an individual, but you're not there as a therapist. You're there really facilitating them to confront their own issue, and but you are helping them frame it in a way so that when they say, I don't know, like they'll never do this, rather than they'll never do this, you might say, okay, we'll put that as a piece of data, they'll never do it. But your real concern is that it's really a concern that you're saying they won't do it.
Yes.
So you're helping them see, oh, I'm really voicing a concern here. And so they are constantly getting to understand more about where they're coming from and what the situation really is.
When you're in the group, what goes through your mind as you're, for instance, hearing the content and so on? In other words, how are you tying that particular experience into dynamic facilitation? In other words, what?
Yeah, so what I'm wanting to do is find the energy of what's happening here. And so if somebody says something with a lot of energy, I'm like all over that case. It's like, oh, okay. So you have a concern. Let's capture that concern.
Watch that interest.
We'll write that, right. And so behind that concern, maybe you have an idea about how that could be solved. This problem could be solved. Let's write that on our list of solutions. So I'm in this, it isn't exactly sorting, but it's in this taking in and giving back, but giving it back in a way that makes sense so that they're taking their own energy and it's coming back to them in a way that makes sense for their lives.
So you're active. It's a very active.
Yes, I'm very active, right. And if it's more than one person and somebody starts to react, it's like we jump over that. We might interrupt this person and say, "Time out, can you hold that? This guy's jumping out of his seat. Can we tell me what's going on in your mind?"
Yes.
And so we're following this energy, which is really, you don't have control over your energy. It's just an emergent process. But it often comes up maybe as frustration or anger or something, but it turns into a creative energy through the process of, oh yeah, here's the problem. The problem isn't the way I framed it at all, the way I attributed it. But the problem is this other thing. And my gosh, even though the problem now seems bigger, I can do something about this.
Yes. And in that sense, all psychotherapy or all behavioral change, one might say, is an error-correcting process and an adaptive process and regaining a different perspective process. In other words, that has to go on if there's to be any change in a person's mental set that they're in, or the narrative that they've created for themselves. If there's to be any change, there has to be some kind of dynamic interaction for that change to occur.
Yeah.
There has to be some confrontation, there has to be some questioning, and there has to be some alternative pathways. And it sounds like you're very active.
Very active.
In doing that, I think.
Yeah, because the core of this, Bart, is that when there's a crisis, that's how people get the post-traumatic. That's how they get the story changed from the normal story of life to this other story. What we're doing is taking them back into the crisis, not to relive it and try and reframe the story, but just taking on an issue that's current for them, that's a new crisis in a way. Only we're taking them through the new crisis in a way that they make headway. They make positive headway. And they are excited about this new headway. And so they end, it's like we're not going through the same traumatic experience, we're going through a new traumatic experience, only this time it's working out right. And we end up with a story that makes sense, for the...
So there's hope.
Yeah, it's more than hope. It's like enthusiasm for an exciting challenge that I'm overcoming. And in this process of overcoming this challenge, I'm discovering parts of myself that I didn't know were there.
Right. And the kids in your situation, to the extent that they were conflicted about the relationships or they had experienced trauma, the homeless, were involved in a sort of repetitive, non-error correcting, non-adaptive way of thinking about themselves and the world, and in other words, cut off and so on. And that this introduces a break in that set. In other words, a break in that rigid corner that they've gotten themselves into. You've mentioned a few times, and I very much agree with you. I wrote a paper a year or two ago on autobiographical self, whom you are and whom you know, that you have to break out of that narrative that you've created for yourself. And this begins to introduce a different...
This is a way to do that. And we're not doing it directly. We're not saying, okay, there's the narrative, let's change it. We're just following a thread of energy that the person currently has. Currently, they're upset about a relationship. Okay, let's work on that relationship.
Do you see dynamic facilitation as having a moving in some way in a psychotherapeutic direction?
Well, this is why we're having this conversation. To me, it's like, of all the things that I'm learning about in terms of dealing with trauma, I don't see a better strategy. I mean, I'm learning about constellation work and some of these other things, and
we even have eye movement therapy.
That's it. Yeah, the head patting and all this stuff. But it's like, I think this seems pretty direct, and I'm constantly just astounded with the results that somebody gets in a 40-minute period or 30, in a short, not 30, but longer. But and if we could do it an ongoing, I hesitate to mention this, but as we're getting a camera person, she's acknowledged to us that she's a sufferer on permanent disability and post-traumatic stress disorder. And that seems like on one hand, it's a coincidence, and on the other hand, it just seems the way the world works. So here we are having our conversation about this, and I've only got, I don't have enough lives to lead to do all the things that I need to do, and I would like to turn this over to you.
Starting another school, we have so many schools, so-called schools of psychotherapy. I guess starting another one, I guess no one would hold that against you. But I think that dynamic facilitation as an agent of change, as an agent of understanding, analysis, behavior change, and originally applied more specifically to society, changes in society or problem, but to apply it to personal behavior, I think it's in the grand tradition of psychological therapies. In other words, it is truly a form of psychotherapy because it has an element of analysis, of understanding, of feedback, of alternative solutions, of participation, arousal, and change. So it has all of the fundamentals of what we call psychological therapy or psychotherapy.
That's great. It's great to hear that. Now, see they used to have a thing called brief therapy. I don't know if that's still around.
Yes, we still use that.
Okay.
Yes.
So, this is what I do in dynamic facilitation office. Say, okay, we'll do 4 sessions. We'll just do 4 sessions. This isn't therapy, because I stay away from the word therapy, and say it's therapeutic because it isn't
Yes.
the traditional
Well,
transference kind of thing.
Our friend Dr. Davenlew, who's in Canada, his brief psychodynamic therapy is often 20 to 40 sessions.
Oh,
So
okay.
this is very brief. We'll call this ultra brief.
Ultra,
right.
okay, so yeah, 4 sessions, I figure we're going to have a breakthrough, and certainly by 4, probably by 3, we'll have a breakthrough, and that somebody will be able to experience, and then they can decide to do another series or something like that. But and I see it as because when they delve into an issue and they hold themselves in that creative place, and I call it, see, it's not. I mean, I've created a word for it. I don't think it's dialogue or discussion or problem solving or even creative problem solving or therapy isn't quite right exactly, but so I call it choice creating. It's a process of where all kinds of new choices pop out at the end. We're not actually creating choices, but that is an outcome of what we're doing. And
I think as an opening, it's very critical. But from a questioning perspective, one would ask, well, is the change first of all, is there change
Yes.
when the person, after the several experiences with the dynamic facilitation group, is there a change an enduring change in perspective? Is there a change in behavior? Can the person build on that for more adaptive behavior outside? And also, is their environment supportive of this change?
A huge
So
factor,
so that could be sort of a critical
those are huge factors.
questions.
And it's true that what I've experienced often is that people have the change. They adopt a new procedure, because this is not just a change inside, but it's an action plan. And people they adopt the new behavior, but then the environment doesn't support them. So you want to do it again? No,
Well, here's a thought. There may be individuals in more traditional therapy who are at a stalemate or a point of stagnation.
Yeah.
And it may be that a period, several of the sessions of dynamic facilitation may be a catalyst for them that can augment the work that they're doing in regular therapy, so-called regular or traditional cognitive behavioral or psychodynamic or whatever. And then the other aspect would be that the dynamic facilitation can be seen as a starting point for change. For change.
That'd be great. Hey, we're getting the sign that we have to stop. But hey, I told you it would happen fast.
Yes, the time is fast.
Thank you very much for being here, Bart.
It's been my privilege.
Yeah, and thank you for being so supportive. I really appreciate that.
My privilege too.
Yes.
You're doing great work.
Okay, Bart Blinder, PhD, MD, psychiatrist, student, teacher of the year, I understand.
A year or two ago. Thank you. At our residency in psychiatry at UC Irvine. Thank you.